all three of us so that we're in the room together. So as you may have seen in the description for today's program, for this session, is that we want to talk about Oregon's journey of inclusive curriculum and standards in our K-12 schools. And joining us today, we have Amit, who you see, that's spotlighted right now. And Joseph is actually in the room, Joseph Santos Lyons. Ray, can you find him? And Joseph is actually joining us from the Philippines. It is 5:30 in the morning for him there.
I can't spotlight him since he doesn't have video on.
Joseph, would you maybe turn yourself on so we can spotlight you? If it's okay. If it's not okay, that's fine. So Joseph is actually going to kick us off with our presentation today, but I also want to introduce Amit, who is here. You see him. He is in Oregon with me, and he is our social science specialist from the Oregon Department of Education. I'm going to not say a whole lot about each one of us right now, but because each one, as we present, we will actually tell a little bit about ourselves to you all. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask Joseph to kick us off. As we talk about this journey that we've taken, it's been a long journey for some of us. So in 2017, the Oregon passed a House Bill 2835, requiring ethnic studies standards in grades K to 12. It is the first in the nation. So we're kind of like the pioneers for the rest of the country. And so today you're going to learn about the highlights and the milestones, how this bill started from a concept to become law, and how it is being implemented now, and what the journey is ahead of us. So Joseph Santos Lyons is the former executive director for APANO, Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. And so Joseph, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it from here.
Hello, everybody. Making sure I got everything plugged in here right. Hold on a second.
All right, Joseph. So are you trying to share screen right now? So he is joining us from the Philippines. So. Hold on. Okay, no worries. Take your time.
10 more seconds. My video to turn off. But
sure. Okay. So while Joseph, oh, there he goes.
Okay, well, hello everyone. Nice to be with you today. Thank you so much, Helen, for creating this space. Amit, it's been really good to also follow the continuation of the work at the Oregon level. As Helen said, I'm Joseph Santos Lyons. I am the former executive director of APANO, and I'm now based out here in Southeast Asia, in Metro Manila, the Philippines. But I had the privilege and honor of working on a couple of campaigns alongside our partners through my role at the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. And also, just by way of introduction, I am Chinese American. I'm born and raised in Portland, Oregon. My father's family is from Hawaii, and I was, through foster care, adopted into a family in Portland, Oregon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the larger context for bringing the Ethnic Studies campaign forward in both Portland, Oregon, and then statewide in Oregon. A little bit about the campaign and some of the tactics that we used. Just briefly about APANO. We are the oldest, largest Pan-Asian, Pan-Pacific Islander community organization. And our mission is to unite our communities with social justice. And we are primarily an organizing group with offices based in both Portland and in some of the suburbs where we have strong concentrations of Asian and Pacific Islanders. And to get ourselves sort of started around the ethnic studies, like some of the backstory that was helpful is that in mid sort of 2013, 2014, the Apano board established a youth organizing line item. We had a sort of a conversation around our long-term strategic plan and really, felt it was critical to have a youth organizing wing to the organization. And even though we had, we were still pretty young at that point, we began to put funds into a line to ensure that there were some resources there for when opportunities presented themselves. We began to form partnerships with youth organizations and young leaders in the state, particularly within the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. So we did a lot of like young people identification. And by 2015, we had hired and raised resources to fund a full-time youth organizer. And that youth organizer worked with some of our young volunteers to conduct a youth community survey and connect with maybe 250 young people, primarily across the Portland public schools. There are a couple of other public school systems in the Portland area, Park Rose, David Douglas, Centennial, and then a couple in the suburbs of Portland. We then at Apano hosted a series of youth organizing trainings, which were, asking young folks with permission from their parents to come to our office a couple days after school and get to know each other, talk a little bit about some of the issues, talk about what social justice is. And we began to also meet with other sort of Asian and Pacific Islander community organizations around what are the needs of the youth in their communities. We conducted another community survey around issues, and this is where we began to identify some of the needs and gaps in the community. We also hosted a session with a range of different groups on issues, and one of those was with the California-based Ethnic Studies Now Coalition, who were also working on legislation to mandate ethnic studies in California. So all this led to a local campaign, which was named by our young people the Missing Pages of Our History. We started a youth organizing group. They called themselves Asian Leaders for the Liberation of Youth, or ALLY, A-L-L-Y. And they identified the problem that they were experiencing in schools, which was a Eurocentric curriculum that also included some damaging stereotypes, both some overt, sort of explicit stereotypes, and also the lack of education also was leading to stereotypes. And then the other big piece for us was around student attendance. And there was really a sense that a lot of young folks of color were not finding a lot of meaning and purpose, particularly in their social studies learning. And the draw of an ethnic studies program was seen as a way to increase overall attendance and participation from young people in school. The solution was to first focus on a local campaign with Portland Public Schools, which has 10 high schools, and to have an ethnic studies offering in each of the 10 high schools within 4 years. Our main strategies were around really collecting stories from students who then came and offered testimonials at the weekly school board meetings. We connected with other groups that were interested in being part of the campaign. And then the young people themselves had a chance to really work on the policy. And they met one-on-one with each of the PPS board members, Portland Public Schools. We also met with some of the key administrators who would be responsible for implementation. And then we had some great media, which I'll share a couple of photos of. And ultimately, we had a unanimous PPS board adoption in May 2016. So this was our kickoff in November of 2015, and we held sort of a rally before a board meeting where the resolution was being introduced at Portland Public Schools. And this was an article that ran in NBC News, where we really, this was one of the quotes from one of our student leaders. Students argue that ethnic studies classes can help increase self-esteem of students of color, develop critical consciousness, and combat racism. And we also were looking at some of the data around students of color participation in schools and found that students who were enrolled in these classes had better grades and they reduced their unexcused absences, graduated at higher rates. These were all sort of critical political issues in the area of education in Oregon at the time. So after the 2016 win, we began to look statewide, and we began to connect again with more groups that were interested in education equity. And this also included some of the work that Helen was doing with the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, the Portland Lodge, who had also been organizing and engaging with educators of color. I just want to note that the political wins in Oregon, there have been a real shift in the 2016 elections. We had seen a lot more sort of leadership around issues of equity. There was a deeper analysis of equity in the political sort of halls of power. So there was more access and opportunity for a campaign like this to really be successful. We also had a legislative champion who was, oh, sorry, is there a question? Or is that just someone not on mute? Sorry. Okay. We had a legislative champion, Diego Hernandez, who was a young state rep who also was co-director of another youth organization called Momentum Alliance, and had been sort of aware of the work that Apano had done. And his office and his chief of staff helped to run our statewide coalition, which was extremely helpful. We had met sort of preemptively before session, before the legislative session with the Oregon Department of Education, which agreed to stay neutral to supportive. And we met with the big three education players who essentially have a say in virtually every single piece of Oregon education legislation. The teachers union, the administrators, and the school employees union, who all also agreed to stay neutral to supportive. And we ultimately introduced and passed House Bill 2845 through the House and then the Senate. And I think a little extraordinarily, we had more Republican yes votes than no votes on both bills. So it also had a Republican co-sponsor of the bill, and so there was 8 in the House versus 6 no votes, and then 9 yes votes in the Senate to 3 no votes. We were particularly surprised by the outcome in the Oregon Senate. To have a 26-1 vote was pretty incredible and really gave us a lot of sort of a statewide mandate. So Oregon really became the first state to have a required ethnic studies curriculum for K-12 students. Many school districts around the country had adopted this requirement, but nothing was ever sort of statewide in the standards, which I know Amit will talk about in a few minutes. So that is my sort of quick and rough overview. And if folks have questions, I'd love to hear them when the time comes. Thank you so much, Helen.
Yeah, so thank you, Joseph, for that quick overview, because that really helped to lay the framework of how we got here, right? And I just want to take a few minutes before we go into questions, because I'd like to go ahead and ask you to hold your questions or put your questions in the chat, and we will have a time at the end of all the different presentations and answer the questions at the same time. What I'd like to do next Hi, Joseph. So good to see you. I would like to do next is to put on two hats. Because I would take a few minutes to to share a little bit about one, what the Portland Lodge journey has been in this particular work, and then secondly, what I am doing both now as a board director of Multnomah ESD, as well as my participation on the implementation side of this bill. So I'm going to take a moment here to share screen to present some information regarding Portland Lodge's journey. I think you can see that now, correct? So go ahead and start with, let's see, current slide. So, so the Portland Lodge's journey started back in 2013. So as you all remember, in 2011, 2012, that's when the Senate and the House both passed resolutions to express regret or apologize for passing the exclusion laws. And so we at the Portland Lodge Board, thought, what do we do now? Now that we have those two resolutions passed, and that and that is recognized, right, by both the House and the Senate, that they are sorry, right, for having passed these laws. Well, we can't just stop there. So at our fall retreat, the Portland Lodge Board decided we need to tell it to more people. We need to make it more public. And so we decided to find a way to do that. And so we first started looking at how do we do this at a state level? And we decided the way to go is like what Joseph said in his presentation, to get a champion, to have a champion for us. So we actually had a connection. One of our members, Karen Gray, is a superintendent from Parkrose High School, from Parkrose School District. One of her friends is Senator Arnie Roeblen, who was on the Oregon Senate Education Committee. He used to chair that committee. And so we got in touch with him. We met with him. And that's how we started this process. That was back in October of 2013. So, so in November, myself, Karen, Stephen, Betty, Jean Lee, Stanley Moy, Diana Davis, and Mary Watanabe, we all went and met with Senator Arnie Roeblen in Salem. And our goal was to get lessons about the Chinese exclusion laws into the schools from a civil rights standpoint. And one of the ideas we came up with was to recommend the state to adopt a day, designate a day in the Oregon school calendar to address this. And so to keep this journey rolling along, we also form a team, including a student, Jacqueline Davis, who's Diana Davis's daughter, by the way, to visit with the current chair of the Oregon State Committee on Education, and that was Senator Mark Hass. And so a team of us met with him, to ask for his support. And we didn't expect it, but right there at that meeting with him, he invited us to present at the Oregon Senate Committee on Education and Workforce on January 16th that year, the following year in 2014. So, so that's what happened. Let's see now, why is my slide frozen? So January 16, 2014, we made a presentation. And Mari Watanabe represented us to present the historical context. Erica Wong and Jacqueline Davis gave personal testimonies, and they both are young people. And Andrea Morgan, who's actually Amit's predecessor, came to that presentation as well. We, at that point, our ask was for the state to designate a Remembering 1882 Day to look at, adding professional development and curriculum development for the teachers in Oregon. to teach this part of the history. We also wanted to schedule a meeting with another senator, Jackie Winters, who had actually proposed and championed for a law 10 years ago to include all Oregonians' history in social studies, and that was called the Oregon Studies Bill. And it was revisited again in 2013, the Senate Bill 739, and that added language to move the workforce. So as you can see in Oregon, this idea of being more inclusive goes way back in the early 2000s. And so, so long story short, all of this work led to Portland Lodge's journey in getting a bill submitted the same time when the House Bill, the Ethnic Studies House, the House Bill 2835 was presented in the 2017 legislative session. So Senate Bill 2280, which Portland Lodge crafted, we submitted the concept. We got the sponsors from both the House and the Senate to co-sponsor this bill. It was to appropriate monies to the Department of Education for the purposes of developing academic content standards for Oregon studies and preparing materials to support teacher training and classroom instruction in Oregon studies. And so this is what we did. Like while the House Bill 2845 was going through this the session, we at the same time was meeting with legislators and educating them about the importance of educating our students with a more inclusive content standards and curriculum. And so our bill didn't make it to the floor for a vote, like House Bill 2845, but it actually went all the way to the Ways and Means Committee. And I just want to kind of show a few pictures of our meetings with the legislators. We actually not only got this bill go all the way to the Ways and Means Committee, but we educated a lot of our members and friends about how the legislative process actually works. As you can see, we started in 2013, and this is the journey that took us to in 2017. So what I'd like to do is to just stop share of the slides here and show you a couple of other, let's see if I could do this. Let's go back over here and share screen again and capture this for you. So this here shows you the bill that we were carrying related to Oregon studies. And these are all of the legislators that we were able to get to co-sponsor. And so, these are the actions that were taken. As you can see, it went from, I'm just going to go backwards here. And January 9th, it started, introducing the first reading, and then in January 17th, and then March 14th, April 11th, April 13th, July 8th. So what I wanted to show there is the fact that it was all through this year. We were like reaching out to our communities, educating the legislators, and doing office visits and so forth. So as I said, our bill didn't make it to the floor, but the House Bill 2845 did. And we're excited because it ultimately is, I think, through the work of Portland Lodge, educating folks, had helped the House Bill to pass. And as you can see here, what this bill does as a part of the very first thing, because the bill is to create the first set of comprehensive ethnic study standards for K-12 schools. And to know that ethnic study standards is not just on the racial ethnicity, but also it includes talking about the histories and contributions and perspectives of ethnic minorities and social minorities. And so what it includes is here. I'm going to just highlight here. It says the histories and contributions of ethnic and social minorities, including people who are Alaskan, Native American, people of Africa, Asian, Pacific Islander, Chicano, Latino, Middle Eastern, and Jewish descent. The bill also covers social minorities, including women, people with disabilities, immigrants, refugees, and people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. So you can see it's a very comprehensive bill. And the very first thing required by this bill is for the Department of Education to convene a group of 13 individuals, each from a diverse background, who will advise the state on where it fails to recognize the histories and contributions and perspectives of ethnic minorities and social minorities. And so I was selected to be a part of these the 13 individuals, and we started our work in November of 2017 as the advisory group. Just to talk about our journey in this work. At first, Oregon Department of Education was like, great, this is the very a very how should I put it, an opportunity, because in 2017, that's when ODE, Oregon Department of Education, was also looking at revising the social studies standards statewide. And so they said, great, we're going to go ahead and do this together. And they came back showing us what they thought, would be standards that they could put in as revised standards for ethnic studies. And we looked at those standards, so we said, no, that is not going to work, because it is not what this bill intended to do. So instead of just accepting what ODE was like saying the ethnic studies standards were, the advisory group took, we divided ourselves into 3 teams. We have a primary team, that's K to 5, middle school team, that's 6th, 7th, 8th grades, and then a high school team. And so the 3 teams took time over more than a year to develop these content standards for ethnic studies. And so the group finished the work. We started in November 2017. We finished our work in June of 2019. And I'm just going to talk more about taking the ethnic studies standards that we created, and how he took it to a panel of teachers to get the standards vetted, and how it then just this year, right? I mean, it was in 2021 that the State Board of Education adopted the ethnic studies standards. So that's the journey what we have that we have been on so far. And I'm just going to take some time to talk a little bit about like where we are now and where we headed. So I'm going to let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you. And then are you going to control the slideshow for me?
If you're able to share, that would be great, or otherwise I could show it too. Would you like me to do it?
Yeah, if you can do that, it's great.
Okay, let me go ahead and do that.
Okay.
So here we go. Go back to.
Yep, that's good. Okay, thank you. I'm Amit Kabrowski, and I'm the social science specialist for the Department of Education. And so I will put my email in the chat, and then if there's anything that comes up after today's presentation or resources that you want to share, you can send them to that email. So Helen covered a lot of ground on sort of the background of the law itself once it got to the legislative process. And this slide just sort of talks about and highlights the last piece of that panel that Helen was on, which was this final report that was issued from the panel. And the sort of big questions coming out from the panel were, what should ethnic studies really do? What is the purpose and goal of this this new law? And so here you can see on the screen some of the things that Helen has already talked about. That it was about race and ethnicity for sure, but it was bigger than that as well. And that we really wanted to give students an opportunity to engage in conversations, right? So this was not just being told something, but really having students do their own exploration, their own thinking, their own discussions about all the topics that ethnic studies brings up, including the ones listed there. So immigration, disability, contributions from Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, religious minorities, etc. So all of that as part of the guidance that was available in the report that was going to move to the next level, which was to the teacher panel that would actually write the standards that would be implemented into the classroom. You go to the next slide, Helen. I'm ready for the next slide. There we go. One more back. There we go. So also then at the time that 2845 passed, which created ethnic studies, there was a realization in the legislature that there was a little bit of a problem because the social science standards that were begun in 2016 and were adopted by the school board, the state school board, in 2018, when those new standards were adopted by law, school districts have to begin to purchase materials that match the state standards. And so school districts began to do that as early as 2018. And then when the Ethnic Studies Bill passed, 2845, and became law, we realized that by the time we got the new standards written, it would take probably about a year. And so that would leave sort of 6 years for schools to be out of compliance if they had already purchased materials. So instead, a second bill was passed in the House 2023. And what that did was sort of re-emphasize the purpose of ethnic studies, and again, called out those different groups that you see listed there in Roman I through VI. And highlighted that those needed to be in our standards, but that the timeline is going to shift to the year 2026 to 2027. So schools can adopt the new standards with the inclusion of ethnic studies, but they are not required to adopt until the year 2026. And this law, of course, passed in 2019, and at the time, a number of our school districts we're probably okay with waiting until the year 2026 to do the adoption. Let's go to the next slide. So this is what the timeline looks like for the official timeline. This still remains true, what it looks like for our three big social science bills. So the one at the bottom is the Ethnic Studies and Inclusive Education, which are the two bills, 2845, and the one I just talked about, 2023. And you can see the sort of timeline is spread out with a number of years set aside for training. When the bill passed, we did not receive any money to provide training for teachers or to identify materials or to encourage school districts to purchase materials. It was an unfunded bill. We did have a piece of legislation last year that got to committee that would have provided funding for schools that were willing, school districts that were willing to adopt early. That did not make it out of committee, kind of like Senate Bill 280. Didn't make it out of committee, but we're hopeful that someone will propose another bill with some money involved to provide training or supplemental resources. Above that, you see another bill, which is the Holocaust and Genocide Bill. That bill also passed at the similar time as ethnic studies. It too does not have funding, but there is some outside funding involved with the folks who are working on the resources there. And so ODE has been able to partner with some organizations that are in support of 664, which is the Holocaust and Genocide Bill. And inside of that legislation, they also are looking to further the understanding of Oregon students around our diverse history, the history of Oregon. And so we're able to pull in a number of those same groups that were named in 2845 are also covered under, under Holocaust and other genocides. And then Tribal History, Shared History, a much bigger bill. That one, as far as money is concerned, it was fully funded. And so that bill, though, most of the money has been geared towards the creation of specific lesson plans to support our tribal history and shared history. And so where all these bills have some overlap, there's a little difference in how they're being implemented. Tribal History, Shared History is being implemented. It was supposed to be before COVID. That school year, now we're looking for implementation in this upcoming school year. Next slide. And so I just want to share with you a couple of the new standards. And so what the teachers put together, we had a teacher panel of about 30 teachers. What we did with that panel was something for the first time that we did at ODE. We always try to, at the Department of Education, to have a panel that represents the state. And so we look for teachers from rural schools and urban schools, suburban schools, big schools, small schools, et cetera. And then we try to make sure that we have at least some representation from the eastern half of the state, which is often hard to get because of the distance to travel. And so this time, though, we looked not only at that sort of geographic diversity, but I really wanted to make sure that there was, the diversity that was called for in the bill was represented on the teacher panel. So ordinarily, when you look for diversity in a teacher panel, Oregon teachers are about 90% white, 10% people of color, and so that's usually the breakdown of our teacher panels, is about a 90-10 split. What we aimed for, what I was trying to do, was to get closer to the 60-40 split, which represented our student population, and so we got to about 38% teachers of color onto our panel. And as well as the geographic diversity, where we had 11 of the ESDs represented, so a pretty good geographic representation as well. And so we originally met for a couple work sessions, including a kind of a deep training on ethnic studies, and then COVID hit. And so what COVID did was put a pause on a lot of work in the state as schools were scrambling to figure out what to do with students. But once the summer hit, and after May 25th especially, the teachers who were selected for the panel really wanted to get this work started again, and were willing to do so as pure volunteers without any extra money or contract, et cetera. So we did come back together after a sort of March to June hiatus and began to work in smaller groups. Since we had all gone through the training together as a large group, we began to work in smaller groups as elementary school teachers, middle school, and then high school group. And so these are not all the standards. We have changed many of the standards as we integrated ethnic studies, but you'll see on this screen here some ways that we have worked to expand and shift the emphasis and some of that critical lens that Joseph talked about, that Apano was highlighting for Portland's standards. So here's just a few in K2. We are going to identify and affirm respect, cultural diversity, heritage, etc., at a very young age, including giving examples of power and its effect in creating outcomes for diverse groups. And the next slide, you can see in third grade, we're kind of bringing in some of those more like bigger vocabulary terms, and some of these, of course, have made it into the news lately. So we are discussing white supremacy and institutional racism and racial hierarchy and oppression in the 3rd to 5th grade, sort of that upper elementary, as well as talking about ways in which the Constitution is important to the understanding of American government, but also in ways that it's been violated. And so plenty of history there to talk about ways in which Oregon or the United States has violated its principles of its Constitution. In the next slide, we're just kind of moving through the grade levels here. Again, you can see the focus on the expansion of justice, on equality and equity, and then thinking about oppression and resistance. And so, resistance is a big word. It can mean a lot of things, including passing laws like 2845 would be an example of the kind of resistance that would be talked about, for instance, in an 8th grade class where they might be looking at government systems. And so that also, oppression resistance, is also central to the Holocaust and genocide studies, as well as to parts of SB 13. And so, again, there's some real natural overlaps there, which allows teachers to actually get to all of these standards when you look at overlaps. And the next one, just a few high school standards. And again, it's just sort of going deeper into some of those ideas around implicit bias and institutional racism, again, racial supremacy. And so you're really seeing the ways in which, if you looked at all the standards, you would see how they're sort of articulated to more complexity as we go through the grade levels, and of course, building on what students know. So by the time they get to high school, we don't have to introduce terms as much. We can sort of go much more deep into what they mean. And then the next slide, I just want to share just real quickly some of the resources we've been highlighting specifically in this case to Asian American history and culture. So the top three bricks in red, those are from the Oregon Encyclopedia. And so that has been a source that many of our teachers have used that comes out of the Oregon Historical Society. There's a number of different authors to those pieces, and those are being updated. So those are just three that have been used recently from some teachers. And then I included on the list or the pictures below some books that we have been highlighting as well. So like I said, the bill itself did not create any funding to review textbooks or to identify textbooks for teachers. That's usually done at the school district level if the state doesn't do it. So some school districts may be doing that already. I have started a supplemental non-textbook reading list to sort of get around that piece, and so I'm adding to it all the time as I encounter books, adding to it all the time. So these are some of the books that you'd see on that list if you were a teacher. And then again, we have one more piece. It's not a slide, but we have something called Oregon Open Learning. And on Oregon Open Learning, teachers can upload resources that they're using in their classroom, and those can be searched by topic or by standard. And so that's what we're hoping sort of the near future is that teachers will add information there.
Thank you so much, Amit. I don't know if some of you may already put some questions in the chat, but I did also ask, as Joseph and Amit are joining us from different places today, and to help us to think about as a group of, Chinese American Citizens Alliance lodges around the country, what are some things you think we could do as an organization to help, Oregon to implement what's going on, as in this work, but also what can they do in the different locales to help push something similar to have to be implemented in their own states?
Well, locally, as I said, I think what we've seen where there's been a lot of success with the Tribal History, Shared History, and the Holocaust and Genocide education is when students can connect with local organizations or local individuals, through museums, universities, cultural centers. So if there are programs that can be hosted where students can be invited, hopefully in person, those are, always memorable for students when they get to actually meet people maybe who've lived the history or who have ancestors who have lived the history. And so that's what I've seen that's been really powerful for students. And then as far as like other resources, as I mentioned, the Oregon Open Learning, if there are materials or organizations that create materials, lesson plans, like you were talking about the 1882 resources, like those kinds of materials would be perfect for Oregon Open Learning as soon as we can tie them to the standards.
Right, and I think right before this session, Amit and Joseph, Ting Yi, was giving a bit of a history on, Chinese American history, and as well as, just looking at how can we as individuals, or as groups to help put together lesson plans. Do you think that would be helpful?
Yes, I mean, I think when we put together lesson plans, we usually have to either vet those or they're through an organization like Learning for Justice. Then if we can match them up to our standards, then yes, that's very helpful.
Joseph, do you have some comments about that? I know you are far now, but you know what that work is like.
So I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question again?
Yeah, so as we know we passed this law, right? But implementing it is going to be the heavy lift, right? So do you have some suggestions for the CACA, both at the national level, what we could do to help here locally in Oregon, but as well as what can they do in their own locales?
Yeah, I mean, we have experienced a lot of competing forces at play within the public education system when new ideas are being proposed for implementation. and the Portland Public Schools has experienced a lot of delays, and Amit can probably, let us know that it's taken a little bit longer than expected at the state level as well, for a variety of reasons, including the pandemic, but also including just having the staff capacity to move things forward. And so it does help to have a group of folks or organizations who are watchdogging or bird dogging the actual timeline to ensure that folks are being put in place, that budgets are being allocated. And Apano definitely stayed in touch with our legislative champions on implementation, because often a call from a state legislator will help get a response from where things are at in the process, and to also sometimes request the highest level appropriate of leadership to be engaged in the implementation process. So with Portland Public Schools, we would often go directly to the superintendent's office or work with board members and, sort of put pressure on them to hold them accountable to the commitments that they've made. I think delays are often sometimes inevitable, but it helps to have someone holding the institution's feet to the fire who's outside the institution, and to bring attention and to ask the question. But for sure, stay in touch with your legislative champions, to have a communication strategy of updating your constituency on the steps that are being made, because that will all be crucial in putting, I think, the appropriate level of pressure on the public institutions to perform, and then to hold them accountable. I will say, from just looking at the work that has happened at ODE and what Amit has shared, just really impressed. Like, I feel like it also has produced really great outcomes. I think Oregon has a model policy that other states can look to. Has really great language. I appreciate the sort of the really age-specific sort of focused work that was done in terms of talking with educators and sort of stakeholders at sort of each grade level. And the materials that are available online are, pretty incredible if you look at where Oregon was before. So thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Joseph. I see Wenli has a question in the chat. Is there a format or template that local organizations can use for lesson plans to get started in thinking about how and what information could be included? So, do you have some suggestions for Wenli?
Well, there's kind of two ways that this could happen. With SB 13, all those are the travel history, shared history lessons. Those are all available online and are probably the easiest to find. And they're in sort of the Oregon format, right? So they have a watermark on them, and you can see how those are set up. I will say that I think those lessons can be a little intimidating for lesson plan writers, because the folks who wrote those lessons really wanted to make sure that students had sort of deep background knowledge, or teachers had deep background knowledge before jumping into those lessons. And so, I don't want that to be sort of a barrier to people thinking, well, I have to write 5 pages of background before I can do a lesson. So the other lessons that are available on the Oregon Open Learning site, many of those are centered around primary documents. And that's something that is really sort of central to all of our social science standards. And so what I mean by that is, if there's, for instance, the Act itself, the 1882 Act itself, if there was a segment from that you wanted students to begin to understand and unpack, and we're writing questions, sort of just comprehension questions, and then sort of more critical thinking questions, that itself could be a great lesson, right? Where you just have a little bit of background and then really have students, holding something that is a recreation of a historical document is wonderful. And many teachers would, like to be able to grab something like that inside of a bigger unit, right? Inside of a unit where we're talking about immigration, or inside of a unit where we're talking about discrimination. That would be something that would be a fairly simple lesson to create, not intimidating to create, and something that would probably get a number of teachers grabbing it, because it's, it's more self-contained. You can do it in a period or two.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And I know that, CCA has been on this journey of looking at how to create more lesson plans for Chinese American history and contributions. It's been difficult. Let me just say that it's been a difficult lift, but yet I don't think we're gonna give up. I think we're gonna continue to pursue it. So we'd love to have those of you who are in the room with us to think together how we can move that work forward. But I just also want to let you know what we want to share today is the Oregon journey, and I think this could actually be replicated in other parts of the country as well. I think number one is really to find a champion, in your state legislature. And then secondly is really figuring out to form a coalition, right? Like Joseph said, what they did was they actually had the youth be kind of like the voice out there. And what we did with our bill, the Portland Lodge, with our bill is we actually got a lot of people to come together, and not just CCA, but I think Joseph, you reached out to ask if we would like drop our bill and just join House Bill 2845. We said, and I think I told you at the time, I don't want it to champion for something that's the other, right? Because if we're just looking at ethnic studies, like something that's add-on, that's not what we want. I think that's when you guys change your concept from an add-on to an inclusive K-12 perspective, right? So I think for our lodges around the country, we could do this. We could do this in other parts of the country and help to bring more inclusive curriculum and instruction into our classroom. And so I know that we're coming up to 2 minutes to the end of our session. I would like to just thank, as Connie said, Amit, thank you so much for your presentation, joining us. And Joseph, thank you for you coming on, being with us from the Philippines again. And I just want to also say, with my other hat on as the Multnomah ESD board member, one of the things that we are doing at MESD, Multnomah ESD, is really looking at how to help in the professional development, helping our teachers to be able to be more inclusive in their work in the classrooms. And I think other ESDs around the states are doing that as well. So with that, I'm going to kind of draw us to the close unless someone else in the room has other questions for either Amit, myself, or Joseph.
I was going to share, there was a request to share the screen there, so I'm going to share that list there. Sorry about all my tabs being open.
No worries.
It's been a busy day. So I don't know if you can see maybe if I can make them a little bit bigger there. There we go. And I will say, I think someone put in the chat also the comparison between Oregon and California. And, we really watched California closely and the way they were, they were really struggling to do what they intended to do. And what they ended up passing was a bill that creates an elective class for high school, an ethnic studies class for high school. And part of the reason was because their bill, the language in their standards was really a curriculum. It was really specific on which groups were included and what lessons were being taught. It was sort of a day-to-day guide for teachers. And because when legislatures do something like that, inevitably someone's going to be felt left out. Someone will feel that a group is overemphasized, a group is underemphasized, et cetera. So what Oregon's approach was really to create these concepts where we could really investigate the different groups that are called out, and then require that those be integrated into the K-12. And after this year, right now we're still letting people learn about this, but after this year, we will remove the word ethnic studies from these standards. And so these are just going to be geography standards and economic standards and history standards. We'll remove the boldface type so that it will just be the standards. Just like someone said in the chat that Asian American history is Oregon history, it's just history. That's what it's going to look like for our standards as well. So that's going to hopefully avoid sort of people trying to pick and choose, or critics coming in and saying like this standard, not that standard. So that's something going forward, I think, is to keep in mind as other states are looking at this work.
Great. Amit, did you want to say more about the slide, or otherwise you
No,
could...
I want to, someone asked about the titles, so I just want to leave those titles up for people to copy down if they wanted to.
Great. So I think we are coming to, yep, we're 2 minutes over time. So glad that we were able to put that slide back up for you all. And Melanie, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Helen. I want to thank Helen and Joseph and Amit for your presentation. And, you know, I think the one thing that really resonates with me is that ethnic studies, it's just standards, right? It should be just standards for everybody. And I think showing what Oregon has done, I think it's an inspiration for a lot of our other school districts, and hopefully this will expand. So thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to be ending this presentation. Our next presentation is in about 13-14 minutes. We will be awarding our Spirit America Award. So I hope you can join us for that. So I will be closing this Zoom out. Please join us in about 13 minutes. All right. Thank you, everybody.